Hello everyone, my name is Tomasz Poszetek, and in this video I would like to show you something that I've been asked a couple of times around. How to post an adaptive card to Microsoft Teams to multiple users at the same time and gather all the responses. Well, we have to be aware that the actions that have been added to Microsoft Teams stack of actions in Power Automate, added quite recently because it was just beginning of this year, called the post an adaptive card to Teams channel and wait for the response, and post an adaptive card to a Teams user and channel and wait for response, are very powerful because they allow you to send your customized designed adaptive card to Microsoft Teams channel or user and then grab their response. You can learn that by watching my other videos. However, the downside of this action is that it only allows you to send this adaptive card to one user or one channel at a time and then stop the Power Automate flow until the response is collected. And then, as this is happening with the regular Power Automate approvals, this response has to be collected within 28, 29, 30 days maximum. So after this time, the workflow simply times out. Now, what could we do if we would like to assign this adaptive card to multiple users? Well, I can say that there are like two options. Depending on whether we want to do it in parallel or we want to do it sequentially, the approach is different. When speaking about doing this sequentially, things are much easier. So if we want to do this sequentially, so that one user is assigned, then their response, then another one is assigned their response, and so on, we can simply follow this approach that we first create an array of users to whom or channels to whom we want to assign this adaptive card. So for example, let's say Tomasz, and the second one is going to be my co-employee. And then I can simply use a loop where I say split these outcomes of that, split the outcomes of the previous action using the semicolon separator. All right. And then in each run of this loop, I simply assign this card to a user and wait for the response, and then by the recipient I can simply use this outcome of the current loop. So in this way, the flow will actually pause itself until this post adaptive card is not completed. It's not that the response is not collected. It has its downsides, of course, because in that approach we are not able to handle the timeouts and things. We can do this much more complex, let's say, by creating a subflow or the child flow that actually handles this assignment of a card and collection, and that has its own errors handling and timeouts handling, so that even if this adaptive card response is timed out, then the flow itself is of course terminated. However, the whole loop simply can run unstoppable. But that is the scenario that is quite easy, and I think by most of us is not that much very desired. So what we would like to know actually is how we can actually assign multiple cards at the same time and gather the response. Now here again, the approaches are possibly different. So for example, you can create a parallel branch, and then in each branch of this parallel section set up a single post adaptive card to the Teams user and wait, so that you have two branches and you can, or two and more branches, and you can simply handle each branch separately. Or you can follow the more complex scenario that I have created to show you how it works. So the first step I did was I created this adaptive card approval that is designed to allow users to share their feedback and then express their decision whether they want to approve or reject. Now the next step is that I've created a data structure, a common data service actually, that follows a little bit of the structure that we can know from Power Automate approvals. So I have three entities. I have adaptive cards approval, which is the header that stores information when this approval has started, what is this ID, what is the content of the adaptive card that is actually being sent, and then once this approval is completed, when it was completed, and what is its outcome. Now, the second entity is called the adaptive cards approval requests. Now, this entity is actually dedicated to keep all the assignments. So every user who is assigned an adaptive card and who is, well, the assignee in the process is having their own record. So in this entity, I know to whom this adaptive card is assigned, well, its relationship to the header, and whether this adaptive card is, that's it. So there are just two values here. It's very, very simple. So to whom this adaptive card is assigned and what is the relation to a header. So if I'd like even to follow those functionalities of reassignment or cancellation, therefore having this information here, I would be able to somehow handle this kind of exceptions. And now the third entity is called the adaptive cards approval responses. Now this one is used to register the response from each adaptive card that is being assigned and is being completed. So here what is being stored is the full response, the full contents of the adaptive card, the outcome, so whether it was approved or rejected, and obviously there is also the lookup to the approval request header so that I can actually do this relationship for the three of them. Now, how this actually work, you can ask? Well, it is not that very simple. So first, let me just jump to the first workflow that is called the header. The header workflow is, well, right now here triggered by the manual trigger. Sorry, not this edit. Now it's supposed to be this edit. So now once this workflow is triggered, what it's doing is first, well, defining the approvers. So let me just remove one of them because I don't want actually to have three. Then there is a definition of adaptive card contents that should be sent. And lastly, well, there is this approval ID generated, so the GUI that is being used and across all the entities. Next, the header is being generated. So the adaptive card approval header is being created. And once that is done, there is a loop running for each of the assignees that simply triggers the subflow, the child flow, that is called the trigger card assignment. Now, once all the cards are assigned, then it is going into an, let's say, infinite loop running as long as the variable initiated here is false. So now once the approval completed is true, then it is terminating the loop. Now when is it terminating the loop? It is doing that once the information in approval header is actually saying that this value here in a field approval result is not empty. So now once there is information in the approval header record that there is a new result registered so that the approval actually is completed, then the loop actually completes, terminates, and it's done. Otherwise, in other case, it is pausing for 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes, it's checking again. Now, this could be done obviously the different way. So instead of doing here this loop until, so loop until this approval is completed, I could create a separate workflow that is being triggered on changes in common data service in this particular entity, and that workflow actually checks if this field here is completed or not, and then based on that it somehow handles the outcomes of the approval. But I just wanted to make this maybe more simple than it could be, but well, the decision is yours. This is kind of an MVP or proof of concept of how this could work. So that is the first entity, the first workflow. Now the second one was the workflow that is used to assign the tasks, the adaptive cards. So this is the workflow being triggered here as a child flow, and what is being passed is the information about the current approver, and well, obviously this approval ID. Why? Well, because once this child flow is being triggered, what it does is first it is obtaining the adaptive cards JSON from the header entity, and then is creating the approval request. So a record in this second entity that holds information about the assigned tasks, about the assigned approval adaptive cards. Then it's doing the response to the parent flow, so that the parent flow is not actually waiting until this adaptive card is completed. Once that is done, it is actually assigning this approval adaptive card to the recipient, to the approver, who is passed to the child flow as an input parameter. And then once this adaptive card is completed, once this adaptive card, once user responds to this adaptive card, the next action is to actually register the response. So here is creation of the record in the approval responses, in adaptive card approval responses entity, where I store the information about the header record, the data outcome, so what is the outcome of the approval, whether it's rejected or approved, and the whole body of the approval, so that the comments, the additional fields that would be present on the adaptive card as well. So the whole data, the whole body of the adaptive card response is stored here in this approval data field. So that is the second flow. And then the third flow that is actually used to check the responses does as following. So once there is a new record created in adaptive cards approval responses entity, so the one that is used to actually store information about the outcomes after the response is done, is first getting information about all the responses created for this particular approval ID, then is getting all the approval requests, so all these assigned information, again, for this specific approval header. And lastly, it is comparing if number of completed responses is equal to number of assigned adaptive cards, and if yes, it means that the approval is completed because we collected all the responses we wanted. So then the next action is to check number of responses that are actually in a status approve. And lastly, if the number of approved responses or rejected responses is less or equal to number of approved responses, maybe that should be just less than. So if number of rejected responses is less than number of approved responses, then actually this should be done the other way around. So if sorry, no, that's correct. That's correct. And that should be less or equal. So right. So then if number of approved is bigger or equal than the number of rejected, therefore the approval is considered as approved. So there is information stored in adaptive cards approvals entity, so the header entity, with the information that this approval is actually approved, with information when was it completed, and in other case it is being rejected as well with the information when was it completed. And so it's done. Now let me show you how it works. I hope it will work this time, because well, I had some issues while testing, but I hope it won't cause any more issues right now. Okay, so let me trigger this workflow manually right now. Whew. All right, now it's running. I will now navigate to my Microsoft Teams, because I should be already assigned an adaptive card, and not only me, because at the same time, you can see, right, there is the new adaptive card being assigned, and at the same time, the journal researcher here, who was a second approver, he's also assigned an adaptive card. So at the same moment, both of us is assigned a card. So I'll say approve, confirm. Now let me just check what is going on inside the process. So once I go back to adaptive card, this child flow being used, we can see that there have been, or that there are, two instances of this child flow triggered from my master flow. The first one is already completed because journal researcher completed his task, whereas mine is still running, right? This is the second instance, a second adaptive card waiting for approval for me. So that's all fine. And now once I go back here to this check Power Automate, I can as well see that there has been that there is already one instance triggered just 30 seconds ago. That has been triggered because there was a new record created in the adaptive card responses entity. And so here, when it's checking if the number of responses is equal the number of requests, well, the outcome is false because there are two requests and just one response. All fine. So let me now complete my task. So I would say and as well I will approve. Okay, so now once I navigate back here to adaptive cards check workflow, there is already a second instance, but this time, because there was a second outcome, a second response out of 2, so 2 equals 2, and it says true, then the next comparison was if the number of approvals was higher than rejections. Yes, it was true. So the request header was marked as approved. So right now I can go back here to my workflow header. Well, because the loop is pausing for 5 minutes, therefore I need to wait a little bit until it unpauses and checks the approval headers again. Alright, so it has just completed because it unpaused the loop and because the header information was actually modified. Therefore, it was actually able to get its value after the 5 minutes. So in the next run, it actually grabbed the value and it checked that the approval outcome is actually filled with information. So it terminated the loop, and so the workflow is completed. Now I know that this is just a kind of a workflow that can be considered as a proof of concept, and as I said, the MVP, so the minimum viable product, although it is quite a significant fundament to create maybe not a powerful, but a quite an advanced platform to create approvals using only adaptive cards and to create and to gather the responses only from the adaptive cards. So just following this pattern, following this approach, you can simply create a process where all the approvals, all the interactions with users are actually handled and controlled by adaptive cards and by your workflows that assign those cards and then collects responses. Now, the important point is that although I use Command Data Service to store information, to control how the workflows are running, to control the stages, control the tasks assigned, adaptive cards assignment, but feel free to use SharePoint as a data storage for this thing as well, or you can as well think about a Common Data Service Lite that is free for Microsoft Teams to be used. So don't take this as the only way that you can actually complete or achieve this scenario. Just use my demonstration, my demo, as kind of a big picture of what you could do to actually work around this limitation that the actions in Microsoft Power Automate allows you to assign these adaptive cards to only a single user at a time, with those loops, with child flows, with the data storage that can be used to store information outcomes from adaptive cards. You can actually assign a single adaptive card to multiple users at a time and collect all the responses from each user in just asynchronous mode independently without affecting the main workflow. So if you have any questions about this pattern, about that approach, just leave them as a comments below the video, and I'll encourage you to subscribe to my channel, to like the video, and to share it as well on the internet. And if you have any questions, just leave them as comments below the video too. I'll try to make my best to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed it. And well, see you in the next videos sometime summer. Bye bye.